How do you handle a mistake that you've made in a Form 8K? Do you file a new Form 8K or do you amend the old one or neither? Today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek and I'm a big fan of use. So I'm going to start with a sidebar or two here and then work my way to answering the question posed. 8Ks can be used to report on more than one item at a time. You're listing more than one of the 8K items that's in the Form 8K that you're filing, meaning that you might be disclosing two totally different things on a single 8K that have nothing to do with each other. They just happen to be reportable about the same time, so you throw them both on a Form 8K. Conversely, you may have a single triggering event that happens to be reportable on a single 8K under two or more of the 8K items. This happens all the time, that you're listing more than one item in the 8K when you're disclosing what you need to disclose about that event in the 8K that you're filing. So for example, an acquisition that is reportable under item 101 as a material contract that you've entered into, and under item 2.01 as a completion of an acquisition. Or another example, the appointment of a new CEO that's reportable as, there's going to be an employment agreement most likely, so you'll be filing that as an exhibit and disclosing that under item 101 of 8K, and then also under item 502C. And there's plenty of other examples. Then you have situations that you wind up filing more than one 8K for the same situation. You're dribbling these 8Ks out over time as developments occur relating to that event and that require you to report on these new developments. That happens a lot too. Here companies have pretty wide latitude in most cases to file a new 8K to report on development rather than file an amendment to the original 8K that started the reporting on that particular situation in the first place. In either case, regardless of whether you file a new 8K or amend the original one, on the cover page of the 8K in the amendment, in the top line, you indicate the date of the new development as the date of the report. So that's the date of the new triggering event, the new development, not the date that you're actually filing the amendment to the 8K. Although, of course, it might be the same date if you get your act together and file the 8K literally on the date that of that triggering event. And then you use the date for when the original event happened in the parens next to that data report as the date of the earliest date reported. A little confusing, I know, and people botch it all the time, and there's actually no serious consequences if you do. But you're trying to signal to the market what's going on, and hopefully being consistent with all your brethren and everyone's doing the same thing. Then there are a number of items in 8K that have specific amendment requirements. This Wilmer Hale Keeping Current with 8K reporting guide is excellent. The latest version is 2017 and it comes in at 111 pages. And it lists these examples of when certain items have specific amendment requirements. So under items 205 and 206, certain financial estimates may be disclosed by amendment if they're not determinable at the time of the original initial 8K filing. You might have something in the item 507 category, voting results, where you're reporting preliminary voting results because that's all you have as of the deadline for the original 8K. And then when you get the final results later, you're reporting that by amendment. And then finally, we get to the question that was initially posed in this Vid-Guide. What do you do if you have an error? So companies should amend their 8Ks to correct material errors or omissions. So this should be done by amending the original 8K, not filing a new 8K. If the error clearly is immaterial, a typo in a word that didn't really change the meaning of what you meant to say, that's probably not worth filing an amendment. You just let that go and then hopefully you don't get sued, right? You're not going to get sued. If the error is in a gray area, I always err on the side of caution. It's pretty easy to amend a Form 8K. And some errors clearly are material. You forgot to file an exhibit that was required to be filed as part of the original 8K. Maybe you got some numbers wrong. Something was described incorrectly that in a way that would have a material meaning otherwise if you fixed it to say what it should have said. So how do you file the amendment? Well, amendments to Form 8K are filed under cover of Form 8K/A. And then as you can see here in the example, each amendment should be sequentially numbered. They show up on Edgar on the SEC's website as 8K/A, or at least they used to. I can't figure out Edgar anymore. Regardless of what sequential amendment it happens to be for that 8K. You might have more than one amendment to that 8K. It's optional, but everyone does it. But you start the 8K right after the cover page with an explanation, an explanatory note explaining the purpose of the amendment, that you're fixing an error. So here's an example. This 8K explains that the term formally should have been formally. So sometimes even a single typo is deemed material enough to warrant an amendment, and this is a good example of that. So the explanation for this filing is made in an explanatory note. As required by Exchange Act Rule 12b-15, you need to set forth the complete text of each item that's being fixed. And 12b-15 also requires you to have that /A at the top of the cover page. Then the amendment is signed on behalf of the company by any authorized officer. Note that there is no requirement to update outstanding 8Ks or statements that were corrected when they were made. But again, you might need to file 8Ks or amendments to the original one for subsequent developments to the original situation that warrant an update. And of course, you might happen to be including disclosure about something in an amended 8K and things that progress and what you're fixing. So it makes sense to update what you're disclosing if there happen to have been any developments. So this Vid-Guide is about making mistakes in Form 8Ks. I have separate Vid-Guides about mistakes made in proxies, 10Ks and 10Qs. You look on zippypoint.com for those. I also have dozens of Vid-Guides about Form 8Ks in general. So you can find those on zippypoint.com or search YouTube with the hashtags of #8K and #zippypoint. Let me know what you think.